Hi everyone, I'm Simon Chadwick. I'm Professor of Eurasian Sport at Lyon Business School. I'm joined here by Carol Gomez and Estelle Brun from IRIS in Paris and from Paul Widdop in Manchester. I'll let each of them explain a little bit more about who they are and what their roles are when they answer questions as we go through this webinar. Just to begin with, the purpose of this webinar is to introduce you all to a digital platform that we have created, IRIS and EM Lyon in conjunction, called GeoSport. And GeoSport is a new platform that will contain different content, podcasts, webinars, written content, and other appropriate sources of content to which people are invited to submit their ideas and submit their writing. We'll talk a little bit more about the platform, about what's going to be published there, about some of the requirements that we have for the platform in due course. But I just want to begin by really clarifying for people what we mean by geopolitics. Personally, I prefer to take a slightly broader view and call it geopolitics, or the geopolitical economy of sport. But I'll perhaps clarify the differences in just a second. Essentially, what we're going to be doing through the new platform is to look at the intersection of sport, politics, and geography. And for me, one of the best examples of why this is relevant and important, and one of the examples that I think helps people to understand the connection between the three things, is if one was to look at Qatar. And if one looks at Qatar, you see a country that is relatively small. To its west, it has Saudi Arabia, one of the region's big powerhouses. To the east, it has Iran. To the north, there is a sometimes turbulent region. And we can think of countries like Syria, for example, which potentially pose a risk to countries like Qatar. And so essentially, by virtue of its geographic position, Qatar finds itself in a strategically vulnerable location, which politically it has sought to address through sport. And just to give one example, I think the World Cup that will be staged in Qatar in 2022 is as much about the security of Qatar as it is about anything else. But alongside that, obviously, in Qatar, we see its investments in sport, which are not just about security and managing risk and political influence. They're also being undertaken for commercial and business reasons too. And what we do see is the Qatari government pursuing a strategy through which it's seeking to build a sustainable industrial sector in Qatar. And so I think in that context, that's really what we're seeking to do through this new platform, is to examine, to analyze, to understand, to critique, to compare, to contrast, to provide cases around geography, politics, sport, with some economics and industry in there. Before I go to Carol, just to add, we are a platform that doesn't just focus on the Middle East, nor just on Europe. We are interested in, and we will be examining different parts of the world. So we're as interested in some of the developments in African sport as we are in some of the developments in Central American sport. We are interested in Black Lives Matter in the United States, but equally we're interested in government policy in China. So at that stage, at this point, if I hand over to Carol, and Carol, if you could give us your vision of what you think geopolitics is and how this connects to sport.
Thank you, Simon. Actually, you were really clear about what is geopolitics, but my definition will try to give another example. For example, you take the example of Qatar, but we can also take the example of China, and it's quite important to seize what and to understand what sport means for China and how it could help to better understand the global situation of China today. When you look at the role, the place that China is having today. So why the question is why geopolitics matter, because it's a real tool, it's a real action in order to better understand the world. And when you see newspaper, when you see news coming through your mobile or the internet, you have to think about what is the links between the several actors, for example, states, but also NGOs, but also athletes, but also international sports federation. And that's why geopolitics are really important to have in mind, and to have this type of understanding in order to better understand the world. And I think that Estelle wanted to say more things about what does sport and geopolitics mean.
So Estelle, if I could bring you in and ask you what do you see as being the link between geopolitics and sport? And if you could tell us as well, I guess from a personal perspective, what do you find especially interesting in this field?
Yeah, so, well, I think geopolitics in itself has several definitions, and it's always hard to even agree on what we mean by geopolitics. And I think that the best way to approach it is just to accept pretty much all the dominant definitions, and whenever you do that, you're always going to find sport in each definition. So for instance, if you look at international politics, you're going to find sport in it. You can just see how nations and organizations have been using sport to gain economic and political power. If you look at geopolitics as having to do with globalization, nationalism, identity, you're also going to find sport, which has been used as a, as a tool to participate in nation branding, in nation building. If you look at the geopolitical economy aspect, you can also find sports and how sponsorships and other very big investments have been put into sports in order for those actors involved so they can gain, again, more economic and political power. So I think my approach to the geopolitics of sport is just quite an all-encompassing approach, meaning that there are so many interactions between sports and geopolitics, and that's why it's so interesting to just look at it. And I think my last point would be that we should also be considering sport as a geographic space in itself, which is able to kind of like produce power and produce social change in itself. So sport can create geopolitics, and I think that's why the Black Lives Matter case is so interesting and relevant, because we see athletes, Carol, you mentioned athletes as well as being major actors of the geopolitics of sports, and this has been the case more and more recently. We've seen that in the US, but we've also seen that in European football, for example. So I think we should keep in mind that there are so many actors involved and so many different domains, and I hope that we will be considering all of that in the platform that we're about to launch.
Thank you. So Paul, from your perspective, and I know that you have got a geographic background, but for you, what do you see as being sport and geopolitics? What's it all about?
Well, as Estelle said, you can come from this from a lot of different disciplines, and each discipline has their own thoughts on this. My own specific, the way I come at things, I take a geographic angle on these things, but I also take a structural perspective. So I would say geopolitics is about the structure of the world and how the world works. So if a decision made over here, it affects a decision over there. So, and often you find that right throughout the history of sport, you'll see that politics is almost like a secret bedfellow, really. You take, if you go back to the 1980s with the Moscow Olympics, for example, and you work your way all the way up, you start thinking that these decisions in sport and politics, they're very closely aligned. And there start to be, in the sports world, these political issues that are going on in the world, the global flow of political ideas and political ideologies, are actually influencing sport directly. So if you think like a decision by the Chinese government to invest in sport sees investment in European football, for example, that's a geographical perspective, and we need to think about politics not at the individual level. I think we need to, what we're interested in, really global flows of information, global structures, global transfer of assets, global transfer of these different structural components that make up the world. So I very much see this platform as something where we can look from a multidisciplinary approach to this idea of GeoSport, and how global politics is really influencing sport, but sport is influencing global politics. I think there's a two-way relationship there.
I think there's a carry-out there for anybody who's listening to or watching this, and that is multidisciplinary. This is not a group of geopolitical studies students or professionals. I work in a business school, and I know my colleagues here work in very different settings. So multidisciplinary is a very important word. Can I just continue with you, Paul? If you had to pick one example right now at this minute, one case, one instance that you think helps to illustrate what geopolitics and sport is all about, what would that example be?
I mean, there's a whole host of, I mean, me and you, Sam, have written about a lot of things, but I think something that sums it up for me is what's happening in Italy at the moment. There's a lot of investment in Serie A, the football club, and it's the investment not only from America, so you look at AC Milan, Roma, and there's different different investments in Serie A clubs, but also then you've got Inter Milan, who are obviously funded by a Chinese organisation, and you start to understand, well, why Italy in particular why that's kind of be like a geopolitical battlefield at the moment between all these different political ideologies, and and all these assets being bought up. But what interests me is that sport seems to be the catalyst for the media interest. So if we didn't know if they didn't invest in sport, we would have no knowledge of Italy being some kind of gateway between all these different political, geopolitical issues and processes. But because it's sport, we are aware of it, we know of it, and then you have to ask yourself, why sport? Why are they choosing sport as a vehicle to promote soft power?
Estelle, you mentioned Black Lives Matter earlier, and obviously that's been prominent throughout 2020, especially prominent throughout 2020. Are there other examples, or do you see this as being arguably the most significant geopolitical case right now?
Well, to me personally, this is at least the one that I find the most interesting, and I think that's definitely something that we have to follow very closely, just because of the recent evolution of political activism also traveling across borders. So right, it's not only happening in the US, it has very big impacts even inside federations and international organizations, just like the International Olympic Committee, right, which has been debating whether we should allow protest signs during the ceremonies and during the competitions, which is obviously crazy when you think about it, because it's supposed to be one of the most apolitical, officially, right, apolitical mega sporting events. So to me, at least, it's very important, relevant. It's been, compared to Colin Kaepernick in 2016, it was only 4 years ago that he started the movement to take a knee. And now it's being normalized, even within federations, even within conservative sports, like NASCAR in the US, where they are also taking a step to have sports being involved in, fighting against social injustice, systemic racism, and that influence is traveling. So to Europe within international organizations. So I would say it's quite important and interesting to follow.
And of course, we've got somebody like Naomi Osaka wearing different names on her face mask as another example of Michael Jordan and his ownership of a NASCAR team. So it is interesting. Carol, for you, an example from recently that really illustrates what we're all about.
I already talked about China. We have plenty of things to say about China, but maybe I will pick another one. Maybe Saudi Arabia, because it was during the last year a very important topic in sports and geopolitics, and especially with Austin major event, trying to reach several clubs, trying to organize and to really have the spotlight on them. So it's really a very interesting example, in my opinion, because you cannot understand the situation in the Arabian Peninsula and the links with the relationship between the other country without seeing what is the situation in sport. And you have to you have to understand what is the strategy of Saudi Arabia today, especially according the plan, the Saudi Vision 2030, which was launched 3 years ago, and it's really interesting to have at the same time sport in mind, but also the geographical approach and the political approach, especially when you think about the link with Qatar, with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain. So it's a very very interesting example, with very linked with the news that you can read every single day in France, in United Kingdom, but also in other parts of the world. So yeah, this example seems to me the most perfect one to illustrate, to try to illustrate, and to make understand why sport has to be taken into account when you think about geopolitics.
And I think all three examples that you've given are great. And from my perspective, my example is a China example, but it's also an India example as well. People who are watching or listening to this may know that China and India have got something of a fractious relationship. They do have a turbulent history with one another, but they do share a relatively small land border that is very mountainous. About 3 or 4 years ago, my attention was caught by Chinese and Indian soldiers fist fighting on the border over a border dispute, which seemed, dare I say it, kind of parochial or quaint in this 21st century of cyber warfare, having these people fighting with their fists on the border. But matters escalated. In the summer of 2020, matters escalated, and several Indian soldiers were killed in a border skirmish with China. And so you had the geography, which was the mountains. You had the politics, which was that relationship and the conflict with the two countries. But then the sport came in, and the economy came in through the consequences for, in particular, cricket. As many people will know, cricket is India's #1 sport. Indian cricket over the last 5 years has increasingly been sponsored by Chinese corporations. And what we saw as a consequence of the spat in the summer was Vivo, a Chinese telecommunications brand, pulling its sponsorship from the Indian Premier League. But what we also saw is talk of consumer backlashes against Chinese brands and against Chinese companies. And I think for me, as I say, the mountains, the military conflict, the sport and the business and the money all got tied up inextricably with one another in just that one case. So for those of you who really are trying to get a sense of what the new platform is about and who we are and what we're trying to do, there you have it in 4 examples. The world of geopolitics and sport explained in 4 examples. Now, I think at this point, just very quickly to say to people who are listening to this and following this through, Carol, Estelle, Paul and myself, we are going to be the editors of the content for this platform. Estelle is the person to whom submissions and ideas should be sent. But we then as a team will decide what is published, and we'll also give feedback to people who send us ideas or who send us content. And I think it's very important to note that. Estelle's email address will be available via the web platform, and so submissions can be made there. But if I could go back to you again, Paul, now. We've said a little bit about GeoSport as a platform. We've talked about articles, two different types of article, a short form and a long form, podcasts, webinars, and other appropriate content. If I could ask you two questions, Paul. The first one is, where did this idea come from? And the second thing to ask you just to do is to differentiate between what I said there was a short form written piece and a long form written piece.
Yeah, I mean, where it came from is that we've been working in this area, you a lot longer than I have, Simon, and we've been writing in this area, and amongst others, there's good people down in London who are also writing about geopolitics and sport, and got interested in their work. And then obviously we're much aware of the great work that Carol and Estelle were doing at the Geopolitics and Sport in their institution. And we got to the position where we reached out to Estelle and Carol to see if there's some kind of shared interest there to collaborate on some kind of dissemination tool for people working in the area, or dissemination platform, should I say. And from there, we've decided on this platform, which we believe is like a really great way of sharing ideas, sharing what's happening in the world, sharing our thoughts, and also, you know, strategic insights it's not only about sport, but how sport can influence other areas of policy. And we're really, really interested in that. I guess in terms of the long and short form, I guess the way I see it is that when we looked at the short form, we wanted like bite-sized pieces of information that policymakers could dip into and take the lead and take pieces of information that are really important to them, rather than wading through pages and pages of information. But sometimes, so that's like what I would see the short form of the.
Just to say, Paul, short form is 600 to 1,000 words.
Yeah, 600 to 1,000 words. So we're looking at bite-sized pieces of information. We're looking at almost like it's almost like a really intellectual blog piece where, you know, full of information, full of evidence, full of thoughts, what that policymakers and other people interested in that area can take and read, and it's going to be a really important vehicle for expressing ideas. In the longer form, Simon, you have to tell me the word count, because I don't know the word count for the longer form. But what I would see for the longer form is where we're pulling out really important theoretical ideas. You know, we're adding to some kind of so we're adding to the debate, and we're adding really about important information for not only to advance academia, but also to advance our thinking, our strategic thinking in terms of policy making in general. So that's where we need to have more of a systematic review of the literature, understand a deeper understanding of what our thoughts and theories are, and also some empirical evidence where, you know, we're putting forward our ideas.
So from my perspective, where this idea came from is the great work that the IRIS team, Carol and Estelle in particular, are already doing. They interviewed me about football in the Gulf region, and so we had an extended interview earlier in 2020, whereby I said a lot. I said a lot about football in the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, and really this came from that piece of work. But I think what's really important from my perspective is this is a new area, so there are relatively few people, not just in Europe but globally, relatively few people writing, talking about providing intelligent insights into this area. I think what's particularly interesting in all of this is when I first started researching and writing about sport, which was back in the 20th century. Does anyone remember the 20th century? It was different then. Life was different. What seems to have happened, especially over the last decade, with the growth of China and the increasing investments coming out of the Middle East, some of the issues that we're now beginning to see emanating in the United States and more, is suddenly sporting decisions, even commercial decisions, are much more politically embedded, possibly even political in essence, rather than just being economic or commercial. And so that really grabbed my attention. These issues move fast. These issues move really, really fast. And what we want to do is to capture them as they're going by, because if people are writing about them and then their thoughts are not being published until a month after or 6 months after or a year after, the issue very often has changed and gone. And COVID-19 is a prime example. The situation a week ago was very different to the way the situation is now. But I think COVID is just one example. And we know that relationships between countries, economic situations, political tensions can change almost instantaneously. And we want to capture that. I think one of the other things that we wanted to do is, and I guess there are two parts to this, is make it easy for people to publish, because we want as many people as possible to be not only writing but also reading as well. And we felt in particular that very often the academic literature takes quite some time to get published. And as I say, it's a fast-moving environment. And I think on that point, I would re-emphasize this is not an academic platform. This is a platform for any key stakeholder or anybody who perceives themselves to be a stakeholder in the geopolitics of sport. So it could be a politician, it could be a director of public policy for a major corporation, it could be a funding manager for a not-for-profit organization, a member of the media. You could just be a sports fan. You could be just a politics fan. So it's very much about providing a multidisciplinary, timely, relevant, intelligent platform that keeps pace with what is happening in the world of geopolitics and sport. I don't know if Carol and Estelle want to add to that in any way.
Actually, Simon, you said the most important things, multidisciplinary. We have to exchange idea, and that's why we decided to launch this platform. We really wanted to think this platform like a hub in order to exchange ideas, exchange opinion. Of course, we won't agree with between each other, but that's why it's important to have a different perception, different analysis about the situation, and we really want you as a spectator, but also as a writer, whatever your function, whatever you link with sport, to try to share also this idea. And one more thing, in order to complete what Simon said, it was also we really wanted to launch this platform in order to have a very quick answer, a quick analysis about the situation. When we have an event happen, many times we have an analysis 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later, and it doesn't really fit with the reality anymore. So we really want to have a direct link with what happened today in the world of sports and geopolitics. And maybe I can pass the ball to Estelle.
Yeah, can you see me fine now?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Yeah, well, after what Carol said, I don't know if I have anything much to add. Just to emphasize again, this is multidisciplinary, and this is also open to a lot of different people who ever wants to write something for us and that is knowledgeable. So not only scholars, not only journalists, but a lot of interesting to hear opinions from a lot of other stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Estelle. We'll come back to you in just a moment because I know you're going to talk us through some of the practicalities of writing for and submitting content to the platform. But before I do that, Carol, if I could ask you, I guess there are two ways to ask this question. The first one is what contribution do you want GeoSport to make to this field? Another way to ask the question is in your vision of the future, what ideally will GeoSport have achieved by the time we get to the end of the first year or the end of 5 years, let's say?
In order to answer your first question, what kind of contribution the GeoSport will give, as you said, it will. We have a very large conception about GeoSport, and we really want to have and to publish several type of articles, interviews, podcasts, webinar, in order to also to address to people that they don't have time to read a full academic paper, 30 pages long, but they just wanted to seize the most important things to understand about what is the situation in Latin America in sport, in Africa in sport, in within the NBA. So it's what we have in mind when we think about this type of contribution. And the goal of the perfect vision of GeoSport will be to try to have a very active debate on this one. In order to also to come back to one thing that you have said a few minutes earlier. It was the beginning was a discussion, an informal discussion between all of us, and it was okay. So actually, we share the same vision of geopolitics and sport. We share a lot of ideas, but we don't have we have to create something in order to share this type of ideas of opinion, of conception of geopolitics. And I really think that this platform, GeoSport, could be not the perfect one, but one place to share this type of product. And I think it could be maybe this we will make a conclusion in 1 year, but I really hope that GeoSport will achieve some goal, like publishing, I don't know, articles that help to better understand the situation, and to create also linked between one journalist in Norway working with another another professor in or NGO in Australia about the situation in NBA launching a program in Africa. So this I really have this in mind, that we can create link between people working on this very very important subject, but also to try to get people interested in our topic, in order to try to demonstrate why sport and geopolitics matters and are really important for better understand the world in where you are living.
So I just mentioned a little earlier that I started researching and writing about sport in the 20th century. And back when I started to do this, Google didn't exist. But Google does exist now. And one of my very first, one of the very first things I often do when I'm researching is I go to Google and I put into Google a search term. And what was interesting is when you put in geopolitics and sport into Google, there's not a lot comes out. And I think that's absolutely crucial. So what we are living right now in the 21st century is a situation where we have this convergence and proliferation of issues that we see as being geopolitical, but which are actually not written about, not just by academics, but often not by practitioners either, nor by politicians, nor by the media. And so at one level, what we're trying to do here is to raise awareness of and build and sustain a conversation about what are increasingly important issues. I mean, some other examples that caught my attention over the summer, Nigeria, for example. There was a piece in Newsweek over the summer about how Nigeria could potentially be Africa's first global superpower. If you know anything about Nigeria and you know anything about Nigerian sports, that raises all manner of issues, some of which are economic, some of which are political, some of which are tribal, some of which are religious. And I think, again, that reinforces our multidisciplinary credentials, but also reinforces our credentials in terms of starting conversations about and sustaining conversations about perhaps aspects of the world and places, parts of the world that currently we don't focus on. The other perpetual example that constantly drifts across my radar is City Football Group, Manchester City, Premier League football team. That's all it is, surely, that's all it is. But actually, what City Football Group is something much more. It's an Abu Dhabi-owned organization with franchises in multiple territories across the world. There is a US private equity investor invested into City Football Group, but at the same time, Chinese entities linked to the state. And so City Football Group is another great example. So hopefully what we're going to be able to do is to help people to understand such instances in more detail, to start the conversation. But I think what's really important as a kind of byline to all of this is we want to be inclusive and not exclusive. So we want to be inclusive in terms of it's not just academics and think tank professionals writing about this. We're interested in people from whichever background who can analyze, who can write, who can think intelligently about some of the big issues, the big challenges that we all face. And certainly it's those contributions that we would welcome. And on the basis of contributions, Estelle, if I could ask you to talk now about, finally, how can people make contributions to the platform, and what are some of the processes that we will go through in terms of bringing those publications through to their final appearance on the platform?
Yeah, so anyone that wants to write for us is going to have to follow some not too annoying author guidelines that they, once they've done that, they wrote something, they can email that to me. And then as a team, the four of us, we are going to review it, hopefully quite fast, because we want it to be fast-paced. Edit it if necessary, and then, you know, within a few weeks or a few days, that should be published on the platform. So sounds quite easy.
Okay, I'm just looking at my list here of some of the principles, and I guess this is a good way to kind of round off this introductory webinar. So what we're looking for in terms of submissions is a short form piece, 600 to 1,000 words, a long form written piece, 1,500 to 2,500 words, an idea for a podcast, an idea for a webinar. What we may also carry is extended written interviews as well, something that Iris is very accomplished at doing already. But as people contemplate what contribution they can make, we are open to new ideas, new ways of presenting information. For example, infographics, it might be one example. We are very open, as I say, we're inclusive, not exclusive, people from different backgrounds, different disciplines. But for those of you contemplating a submission, just if I could run through this final list for you, we're looking for submissions that are timely, that are relevant, that are well researched, are coherent, have a clear narrative, are analytical, account for different perspectives, provide examples, offer meaningful conclusions, and engage key target audiences. That's a tall order, I know. It's a tall order, but hey, we live in a fast-moving and tough world. So these are our requirements. This is how it is. But don't let it put you off. because I think we want to be encouraging. We want to receive submissions. We want some really exciting, new, innovative perspectives. And we want to raise the conversation around geopolitics and sport. So, final word, Carol, just to add.
Yeah, everything was already said. Be brilliant, be innovative, write us a very beautiful article and project, and we definitely will try to share. And maybe one word, we talk a lot about football during this webinar, but of course you can write about tennis, basketball, handball, volleyball, Formula One, whatever you want. We have, as we said, we want to be to have a very multidisciplinary multidisciplinary as a science, but also multi-sport. So definitely, if you want to talk about badminton, go for it.
Thank you, Paul. Final word.
It's not only about the emerging markets that are coming out of China and Brazil. It's also about how, old states, such as, I call them old because we've been there for centuries in sport, is how France used sport as a cultural soft power indicator, how the British use soft power, but also in all these new political areas that are growing all the time. So you think that there's a nationalist movement growing in the United States, yet the NBA are trying to promote American culture throughout the world. So it's that duality between what's going on in individual nations and the global politics in the world, and it's just such an interesting time to be working in this area.
And Estelle, final word.
Yeah, as Paul just said, I think this is a very interesting time, and it's only getting more and more interesting. So I think this is a good timing to launch this platform and looking to see what it's going to look like.
Final word from me is fasten your seatbelts and enjoy the ride with us, because hopefully we're going to be publishing some really interesting content. And going back to an earlier question that I asked Carol, my vision is that eventually people will be coming to us as a #1 source of information about geopolitics and sport. So hopefully that can include your submission, whatever that submission is. So thank you. And with that, I'll thank you for listening. This will be posted on our platform. You can consult with it at any time to understand what the platform is all about. But otherwise, thank you for listening, and hopefully thank you for submitting to us.